Hello, everyone. My name is Vadim. I'm the co-founder of FutureFlow. At FutureFlow, we're designing a big data analytics system that monitors the movement of money in the economy. At the heart of what we do is understanding money from the perspective of flow rather than the perspective of stock, as is done traditionally. Um, we believe that this way we can uncover the behavior of money, and we think that their behavior is largely independent of the behavior of the entities or the people who spend the money. So today we want to demonstrate how banks can use our technology in order to fight money laundering and other forms of electronic financial crime. This is a huge problem, estimated at around $1 trillion per year, and usually less than half of 1% of that amount ever gets flagged or seized. And at the heart of the problem is inability of banks and financial institutions to cooperate and to share information with each other due to various client confidentiality and data protection rules. This is exactly what criminals exploit. Now, to be sure, there are a lot of AML-centric solutions on the market, but we feel that most of them are very KYC focused. In other words, they help banks to understand who is their customer, but the question is, even if you know your customer, how do you know what your customer's money is doing? How do you know what it had done 3 steps back, for example, especially if it happened away from your bank? Or how do you know what the money will do 3 steps forward from where you are at the moment? Again, if that happens outside of your banks. This cannot be done easily, especially outside of the United States. And so we want to show how our technology helps with that. And this way, right now, the issue is that banks are restricted to only the kind of information that they see based on the flow of their customer, but they cannot see what is available to the rest of the industry. And we want to expand that and enable that with our technology. So I just want to show you a few steps from our demo. This demo is available on our website, and you can play around with it at any time. Basically, in the demo, we have a bunch of transactions, which I'm just going to make this a little bit larger so that it's better visible. Yeah, so these are a bunch of transactions that have been put into the system by various conversation partners, and I'm going to focus on a couple of them that I know look interesting, just for demonstration purposes. So today we'll be speaking about this transaction here between Stella and Elizabeth for 10 units. Now these units, by the way, can be anything. It could be pounds or dollars or euros. In this system, this is just a simplified hypothetical amount. So this is the way how transactions are normally recorded or tracked in the modern financial system. And the issue here is that if you want to know anything about this transaction, then you really have to focus on either the buyer or the seller. And that becomes difficult if they happen to be customers of 2 different banks. And that becomes even more difficult if they happen to interact with customers of yet even more banks in the course of their daily business, because that information cannot be shared easily. But what we do at FutureFlow is we focus on the amount instead. And in our system, this amount 10 is represented as a collection of 10 specific units. These are all unique IDs. And as you can see, each of these units has its own distinct history, its own distinct path that it has taken prior to being selected into the given transaction that we're looking at. And we can take these paths and we can combine them into graphs that look like this. So here we are looking at the transaction. It was between Stella and Elizabeth, so it's here. So we're somewhere here on the transactional graph. But just based on the histories of the units that were selected into this transaction, we're able to pull in all of these other users just because some of these units have happened to pass through them prior to being in our transaction. By the way, the way you read this graph is that each different colored dot represents a customer of a different bank. And the dots that are slightly larger represent, hypothetically, users that are currently being flagged as suspicious by their respective banks. And what we argue about this graph is that what makes it interesting is not so much the identity of each of the individual users on the graph, but rather the overall topology. And in fact, we expect banks to feed us this information in already scrambled form. So in fact, it will look something like this. So this way, the actual client identities stay within the walls of the bank, of each participating bank, but what we get in the system is the overall shared topology of the flow. So as you can see here, what we're really doing is just building a data set which enables multiple banks to cooperate and to use money as a medium of informational exchange, a medium through which they can signal to each other what they know about specific customers that they're dealing with without necessarily revealing who those customers are until that becomes absolutely necessary. But on top of that, most of these customers actually happen to be completely benign, so they can be bypassed in any kind of analysis anyway. So let's just go back to unscrambling the graph just because it's easier to look at. So again, we're somewhere here on the graph, transaction between Stella and Elizabeth. Of course, we're looking at the units that happen to have passed down to us from all of the transactions that are elsewhere in the graph. And of course, in this case, some of the units that may have been selected in some of those other transactions may have not ended up with our transaction here. They could have gone elsewhere. And that could be something that is interesting to know as well. Well, the neat thing about this is that you can focus, again, here are the units from this transaction. You can focus on any of these units, let's just take this one, and actually trace it up to the current transaction and see all of the transactions in which this particular unit has been prior to being selected into our transaction. And you can focus on any of those transactions, let's say this one, and say, well, what else was in that transaction together with the unit that we ended up with? And then you can take the histories of these units and trace them forward. Do something like this. So as you can see here, we started somewhere at a certain place on the graph, and just based on the information that was given to us there, we're then able to go back in our data set and traverse it as much as we want in order to then end up in various other places on the graph. And basically, this way we have a system that allows each participant to enter at a certain point on the graph and start looking for information that is relevant for their money laundering, terrorist financing, and other types of electronic financial crime information until they find it somewhere. So I think we're just about to come out of time, so I'm going to stop here. There's a lot more that we can show here. We'll be happy to do it at the booth afterwards. Thank you very much.